Anne Frank dreamed of becoming a writer. She never lived to see her first book published. She believed she was writing for only one friend. Instead, her words would reach millions. The world remembers Anne Frank because of a diary. But before she became a symbol of hope, she was simply a little girl, a daughter, a sister, a child who laughed easily, a child who believed that people were still capable of kindness. This is not only the story of how Anne Frank died, it is the story of how one ordinary life became one of history's most extraordinary voices. Anne Frank was born on the 12th day of June in the year 1929 in Frankfurt, Germany. She grew up in a loving home with her parents, Otto and Edith Frank, and her older sister, Margot. Anne was curious about everything around her. She loved books. She loved stories. She loved asking questions that made adults smile. Her imagination seemed larger than the world she knew. Nothing in those early years suggested that history would one day remember her name. She was simply a little girl, living the ordinary childhood every child deserves. While Anne was still very young, Germany was changing. After Adolf Hitler came to power, life became increasingly uncertain for Jewish families. Otto Frank understood that the future they had imagined for their daughters was quietly slipping away. Hoping to protect his family, he moved them to Amsterdam. For a few precious years, life felt almost ordinary again. Anne went to school. She made new friends. She discovered a growing love for writing. She laughed. She dreamed. She believed the future was still waiting for her. She could not know that these would become the happiest days of her life. In the year 1940, the war reached the Netherlands. German forces occupied the country. Life did not change all at once. Instead, freedom disappeared one rule at a time. Jewish children were separated from their classmates. Many public places were no longer open to Jewish families. A yellow Star of David had to be worn on every journey outside. Each new restriction seemed small on its own. Together, they changed everything. Anne did not lose her childhood in a single moment. She lost it quietly, one ordinary day after another. On the 12th day of June, in the year 1942, Anne celebrated her 13th birthday. Among her presents was a small red and white checkered diary. She named it Kitty. From that day forward, Anne no longer wrote only about what happened around her. She wrote about what she felt, her fears, her dreams, her questions, her hopes. She believed those pages would remain her private thoughts. She never imagined they would one day become one of the world's most treasured books. Less than 1 month later, the Frank family quietly left home before sunrise. They carried only what they could without attracting attention. The rest of their lives remained behind. Their destination was a hidden space behind Otto Frank's office in Amsterdam, a place that would later become known as the Secret Annex. No one knew how long they would remain there. They only hoped it would be temporary. As the hidden door closed behind them, Anne stepped into a world measured not by days, but by silence. The Secret Annex was never meant to be a home. 8 people shared a handful of hidden rooms behind an ordinary bookcase. Every morning, when the office below came to life, silence became their only protection. No running, no loud laughter, no footsteps that might be heard below. Anne was only 13 years old. Instead of discovering the world, her world grew smaller with each passing day. Yet inside those narrow walls, something within her was quietly growing stronger. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The diary slowly became the place where Anne could be completely herself. She wrote about fear. She wrote about loneliness. She wrote about the small moments that still made her smile. She questioned injustice. She questioned human nature. She questioned the person she hoped to become. With every page, her thoughts became deeper. Her words became more confident. Without realizing it, the little girl who had once written for herself was becoming the writer she had always dreamed of being. Whenever it was safe, Anne climbed to the attic. There, a small window looked out over the rooftops of Amsterdam. She watched the trees move gently in the wind. She searched the sky for birds flying freely above the city. Those quiet moments reminded her that beauty still existed beyond the walls. Anne once wrote that as long as the blue sky, the sunshine, and nature remained, hope could remain as well. Perhaps that is why her story continues to move the world. The walls around Anne grew smaller every day, but her heart, her imagination, and her hope never did. As the months passed, Anne changed, not only in age, but in the way she understood herself. The Secret Annex had become smaller, yet her thoughts had become larger. She questioned the world around her. She questioned the choices people made. Most of all, she questioned the kind of person she wanted to become. The diary was no longer simply a place to record each day. It became the place where Anne discovered her own voice. Among the people hiding in the annex was Peter Van Pels. Like Anne, he was growing up in a world that had almost stopped. They spoke quietly. Sometimes they sat together in the attic. Sometimes they simply shared the comfort of another person's presence. There was no promise about tomorrow, only the hope that tomorrow might still come. For Anne, Peter was more than a companion. He was a reminder that even during the darkest years, the human heart continued to search for friendship, understanding, and love. In the spring of the year 1944, Anne heard a radio broadcast from the Dutch government in exile. People were asked to preserve diaries and personal letters so that the experiences of ordinary citizens could be remembered after the war. Anne listened carefully. Then she made an important decision. She began rewriting many of her diary entries, not because she wanted to change the past, but because she hoped someone might one day read her story. She dreamed of becoming a writer. She believed words could outlive fear. She could not know that the dream she was writing toward was already becoming reality. On the morning of the 4th day of August, in the year 1944, someone opened the door to the Secret Annex. After more than 2 years in hiding, the silence that had protected 8 lives was broken forever. German officers, accompanied by Dutch police, entered the building. Everything happened quickly. There was no time to prepare, no time to hide, no time to say goodbye. Anne left behind the small room where she had grown from a child into a young writer. She walked away carrying only what she could. She never saw the Secret Annex again. To this day, historians have not reached a final conclusion about exactly how the hiding place was discovered. Some questions remain unanswered, but one fact has never changed. That morning, 8 people walked out. None of them knew they would never return. In the confusion that followed, Anne's diary remained inside the annex. The notebooks, the loose pages, the words she had carefully rewritten. They were left scattered across the floor. Miep Geese quietly gathered every page she could find. She placed them in a drawer and waited. She never read a single page. She believed Anne herself would come back for them. She kept the diary safe. Without realizing it, she was preserving one of the most important voices of the 20th century. Anne and the others were first taken to Westerbork. Later, they were deported to Auschwitz. Months afterward, Anne and her sister, Margot, were transferred to Bergen-Belsen. The diary ended, but Anne's journey did not. For the first time in more than 2 years, there were no pages left to tell her story. Only history and the memories of those who survived could speak for her. Anne's diary ended without warning. There was no final chapter, no farewell, no last sentence. One day, the writing simply stopped. For more than 2 years, Anne had filled those pages with fear, hope, questions, and dreams. Now, there was only silence. The young girl who had shared every thought with Kitty had entered a world where no diary could follow. From this moment forward, history would have to tell the rest of her story. After Auschwitz, Anne and her sister Margot were transferred to Bergen-Belsen. Winter brought hunger. Disease spread quickly through the overcrowded camp. Every day became a struggle simply to survive. Witnesses who survived later remembered seeing Anne during those final months. She was exhausted. She had lost almost everything. Yet those who knew her also remembered that hope had not completely disappeared from her. She never knew that freedom was only weeks away. When the war finally ended, Otto Frank returned to Amsterdam alone. He searched for news of his family. Slowly, the answers arrived. Edith was gone. Margot was gone. Anne was gone. He was the only one who returned. Then Miep Gies handed him a bundle of notebooks and loose papers she had carefully protected since the day Anne was arrested. She had never read them. She believed they belonged to Anne. As Otto opened the first page, he saw his daughter's handwriting once again. He was no longer reading a diary. He was hearing Anne's voice, and in that quiet moment, a father realized that although he could no longer hold his daughter, he could still carry her dream. Anne Frank never lived to see her dream come true. She never held her own published book. She never knew that people across the world would one day read her words. After the war, Otto Frank fulfilled the promise that Anne never had the chance to fulfill herself. Her diary was published. What began as the private thoughts of a young girl became one of the most influential personal accounts of the Second World War. Readers did not remember Anne because she was famous. They remembered her because she felt familiar. She laughed. She doubted. She hoped. She dreamed. And through her words, she reminded millions that history is always lived by ordinary people. Nearly every generation has discovered Anne Frank in its own way. Some have found courage, others have found compassion. Many have simply found a young girl whose hopes felt no different from their own. Anne never claimed to understand the world. She simply tried to understand herself. Perhaps that is why her voice has never faded. It speaks beside us, quietly, honestly, humanly. Every time someone opens her diary, Anne is given a chance to speak again. Not as a symbol, not as a victim, but as the young writer she always hoped to become. Anne Frank once wrote that paper has more patience than people. Perhaps that is why she trusted her diary with every fear, every dream, and every hope she carried inside her. She believed she was writing to one friend. Instead, she found millions. History remembers the war. History remembers the tragedy. But the reason Anne Frank is still remembered today is something far more powerful. She refused to let fear silence her humanity. She refused to stop believing that goodness still existed. And because she kept writing, the world never stopped listening. Thank you for watching Story Reverie. If this story stayed with you, we invite you to join us for another journey through the lives that shaped our world. Because every life leaves a story, and every story leaves a light behind.